Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today, instead of talking about books, I'm going to talk about musicals. I really like musicals. In general, I really like the theatre. That's sort of definitely one of my interests alongside reading books. I love to go and see shows at the theatre, both like regular plays and musicals. And I've been thinking for a while that I would kind of like to talk a bit more about theatre on this channel. And in a Q&A I did a month or two ago, I kind of talked about musicals a bit, and people said that they would like to see a video about musicals. So I thought I would do a video on my favourite musicals. I then realised that I have actually done a video on my favourite musicals before, but it was about 5 years ago. And I feel like there are some changes in the order and the shows, and I probably have different things to say about them, so I thought I would just make a favourites musicals video again. I didn't even remember that I had done that video 5 years ago, and so most of you probably don't, so anyway, it's fine. I have 15 like top musicals, and then I have a couple of honourable mentions, and if you have any recommendations for me, please do let me know. It is worth me saying that I do have one musical writer who I love hugely, so this list is like relatively dominated by Stephen Sondheim, but you know, he is the best. Anyway, before I get into my top 15 musicals, I do have a couple of honourable mentions. So one of my honourable mentions is The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which is a musical by Rupert Holmes, obviously adapted from the Charles Dickens novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. So this is an honourable mention because I've never seen it performed. I have seen all the rest of these musicals performed, but I've never seen The Mystery of Edwin Drood. But I have listened to quite a lot of the music and I really enjoy it. And I also think it is a hugely fun concept for a musical, because the idea is that obviously The Mystery of Edwin Drood by Charles Dickens is an unfinished novel. He died halfway through writing it. The musical has different endings, and the audience vote on what they think happened to Edwin Drood, and then there are, I think, like 8 possible endings. There were like lots of different like confession songs from various different characters, like explaining what happened, and there were all these multiple endings, which I just think is such a fun concept for an unfinished novel. So I do really love that musical. As I said, I haven't seen it on stage. I don't think it's put on very often. To be honest, I feel like the different endings is a logistical nightmare aside from anything else, but I do think it's really fun and I do quite enjoy the music, so I thought I would mention that one. And then my other like honourable mention is Cats by Andrew Lloyd Webber, because I wouldn't really consider it a favourite musical now, but it was definitely a really like important musical in me getting into musicals as a kid. Cats and Joseph and His Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, also by Andrew Lloyd Webber, were probably my favourite musicals when I was like, I don't know, between the ages of 8 and 12, until whenever I saw Wicked. And those two shows definitely got me into musicals a lot. And so even though I wouldn't like rate them as highly now, I do think they were very like pivotal in getting me into musicals. And I do also really enjoy Cats. Maybe Cats should be in my top 15 anyway. They were both like really pivotal in getting me into musicals. At number 15, I have put The Lion King, a musical by Elton John, Tim Rice, Roger Allen and Irene Mecchi. So I specifically mean the Lion King show rather than the Disney film. I do really enjoy the Disney film, but anyway, the show is really fantastic. I haven't seen it for a long time. I don't think I've seen it since I was a teenager, but I really, really love it. I think it's a really wonderful show. The show that I saw anyway many years ago, all the kind of puppetry for the animals was really, really interesting and just well done, and it was always a great time to go and see it. There's 1 or 2 songs in it that aren't in the Disney film that I especially love as well. At number 14, I have Evita by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. This is the only like Andrew Lloyd Webber musical in my proper 15. He is a very, very important like figure within musical theatre, especially within British musical theatre. He's written a lot of musicals. I have mixed feelings on Andrew Lloyd Webber. I find some of his shows a bit samey, but I do love Evita, and Evita is definitely my favourite of his shows, and I think it's really fascinating. So Evita is a musical about the life of Eva Perón, who was the wife of an Argentinian political figure in the mid-20th century. And I really like Evita as a musical. I think it is really powerful, really emotionally interesting, with some fantastic songs. Obviously Don't Cry for Me Argentina is very famous, but there are a lot of other amazing songs within Evita, and I think it's like Andrew Lloyd Webber's music at its absolute best. In general, I'm quite a big fan of like historical musicals and musicals that look at history. That's something I quite enjoy, and like, because I loved the musical Evita as a teenager, I like read a few books about Argentinian history, like specifically because I had been like inspired to be interested in that because of that musical, which is kind of fun as well. So anyway, at number 13, we have the first Stephen Sondheim in this list, but most definitely not the last, and that is The Frogs. So this one is quite new to me. I only saw it for the first time very recently, and I'd heard maybe a couple of songs from it before, but I hadn't seen it all the way through or heard all of the music. So this is a musical by Stephen Sondheim, Burt, Shevelove and Nathan Lane, and it's just so weird, but so fun. It won't be for everyone. I mean, Stephen Sondheim, as a rule, is not for everyone. He is a wonderful writer of musicals, but his music is a little bit avant-garde, shall we say. You know, like some people say they don't like musicals because they think musicals are cheesy, which, you know, I take issue with, but also Stephen Sondheim is never cheesy. Like, as someone who loves music and who is quite interested in like how music works, Stephen Sondheim is fascinating, and he does really different things with music. And I just absolutely love his work. I know that he's not for everyone. I understand why, but also he's the best. I also think Stephen Sondheim's musicals tend to be really, really narratively interesting and often have really interesting, unusual narrative structures, which is something I love about his work. Back to The Frogs. The Frogs is a very weird musical. It is a musical that is an adaptation of an ancient Greek play. And when I went to see it, I kept thinking, surely this can't actually be the plot of the ancient Greek play. But actually, no, it is the plot of the ancient Greek play, also called The Frogs, which is about the god Dionysus and his slave going down to the underworld to rescue a famous Greek playwright, to bring him back to the surface, to bring him back to life in order to, like, make the world a better place again, because the world is in trouble and needs the playwright. So in Stephen Sondheim's version of The Frogs, that is the plot, but instead of going back to rescue an ancient Greek playwright, they're going back to rescue a 20th century playwright, George Bernard Shaw. And we're following these two characters as they travel down to the underworld and all the people they meet along the way, and it's very silly and very fun. And I just really, really recommend it. Also, the music is just like a delight. It's very, very silly, and there was a production on quite recently at the Southwark Playhouse which was just marvellous and so entertaining, and yeah, I loved it a lot. At number 12, I have Pacific Overtures, also by Stephen Sondheim, along with John Weidman, and this is another like history musical. As I said, I really love a history musical. This is specifically about 19th century Japanese history, and was probably the reason I got into Japanese history as a teenager and read lots of books about Japanese history, and then got into Japanese literature later on in life, probably to do with Pacific Overtures. It is a musical from the 80s. I don't think everything in it is perfect in terms of its understanding of Japanese history and culture, but I do think it is a really interesting musical with some really powerful moments, with a really interesting look at sort of culture clash and the history of the relationship between Japan and the US. And I think there are some songs in it that are absolutely incredible. Bowler Hat, Someone in a Tree, it's just great. At number 11, I have La Cage aux Folles by Jerry Herman and Harvey Fierstein. This is a really wonderful musical that I've seen a couple of times, though not for several years now. So La Cage aux Folles is a musical about two gay men who run a nightclub together, a drag nightclub in France in the 1970s, 1980s. And if you've ever seen the film The Birdcage, that is an adaptation of the same thing that La Cage aux Folles is an adaptation of. So The Birdcage isn't a musical, but it's the same story. La Cage aux Folles is about this couple, these two men, and what happens when their son wants to bring his girlfriend home to meet them, and is worried about how she, and particularly her parents, will react to his unconventional family. This is a musical from the 1980s, so it was like quite a big deal when it first came out on Broadway. I think it was the first like Broadway musical centered on a gay relationship, and it's a fantastic musical that is at its heart a really wonderful love story, as well as being so much about sort of identity and being yourself, and it's just wonderful. Okay, at number 10, I have Matilda by Tim Minchin and Dennis Kelly, which is a more recent musical, one that I've seen a lot more recently too, and this is fantastic. It is a musical adaptation of Roald Dahl's novel Matilda, and it follows Matilda and her experiences at school and her difficult relationship with her parents, and it's just beautiful. Tim Minchin is such a talented songwriter, and the music in Matilda is amazing. Like, some of the songs in it, Quiet, it's just, like, Quiet is one of the best songs ever. You know, the last time I went to see Matilda, I felt like very emotional about it. I don't know, I think it's so good. It's such a fantastic musical, and the stage show on in London at the moment is just incredible. Like, the staging of it is amazing, and the songwriting, as I said, like, Tim Minchin is fantastic. I really, really highly recommend going to see Matilda if you're ever in London or anywhere else where it's on. It is so good. At number 9, I have In the Heights, a musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Quiara Alegría Hudes. You may have heard of Lin-Manuel Miranda because he is the writer of the musical Hamilton, which I'll talk about in a minute, but In the Heights is a lot less famous, and it really should be more famous because it's so good. I saw this twice when it was on in London a few years ago and just loved it, and I really want to see it again. There is a film out actually which I haven't seen and I do need to see. It is really a musical about community, as well as being a love story, and a story about so much else, and it's just fantastic. The music is amazing. The staging of the production I saw in London was so cool. The characterization in it is just fantastic, and I really think that Lin-Manuel Miranda is such a talented writer of musicals. Like, in my mind, he is the successor to Sondheim. You can definitely see Sondheim's influence on him, and he has spoken, I believe, about how Sondheim was very influential on him, and you can really see in his music and the way he uses lyrics. Like, obviously he has a lot of other musical influences too, but like, in terms of musical theatre, you can see how much Sondheim has influenced him, I think. And I'm just very excited for everything he does in the future because I think he's hugely talented. And yeah, In the Heights is a wonderful, wonderful musical. At number 8, I have Wicked by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman. I love Wicked, and I have loved Wicked for a long time. Wicked is the musical I have seen the most times on stage. I have seen it a lot of times, like 12 times. As a teenager, I became very obsessed with Wicked. There were points in my teenage years where I knew the words to every single song from Wicked, and I probably still know the words to a lot of them. And as a teenager, I was obsessed with it. Also, when I was a teenager, I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was a teenager, they used to have a deal on at the theatre where Wicked is on, where if you queued up early in the morning, you could get cheap tickets in the front row. So I used to do that often. And so I have been to see Wicked a lot of times because of that. And I also loved the new film version. I know we've only got part 1 and they're going to do part 2, but I absolutely loved part 1. I thought it was so good. I'm so excited for the other film. And before I saw it, I was quite wary of the fact they split it in 2, but I'm glad they have, actually, because they had time to do everything justice, and it's fantastic, and the look of it and everything about it was just so magical. I love Wicked so much, and I really must read the book because it is based on a novel, and I haven't read the novel, and that is shameful considering how much I love the musical and how often I've seen it, so I need to go and do that at some point. Anyway, Wicked is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, about how Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, you know, turned against the Wizard of Oz and why, and it is wonderful. It is so fun and so cheesy in the best way, but also with like really complicated themes about good and evil and how we assign good and evil, about prejudice and difference, and the social othering of people who are different in some way, and it's just amazing. At number 7, we have another Sondheim, Sunday in the Park with George by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine. I have only seen it once, and it was a long time ago, and I feel like it's one of those musicals that I have like learnt to love since first seeing it on stage, and I've listened to the music a lot more since I first saw it. I think it was probably one of the first Sondheims I saw. I don't think I loved it when I first saw it as much as I do now, and I would love to see it again. There was a production that was meant to be on in 2020 and got cancelled because of the pandemic, and it never came back, and I'm so sad because I just really want to see it on stage again. It contains my favourite song from any musical ever. Just one of my favourite songs from anything, hands down. The final song of the musical, Sunday, is just like one of the most beautiful things ever written. And anyone who thinks Sondheim is like atonal and not beautiful and lyrical and melodic, like, listen to Sunday. The best song ever. Okay. Sunday in the Park with George is a musical about the 19th century French post-impressionist painter George Seurat. And in the first half of the musical, before the interval, you're kind of in the 19th century with George, and then in the second half, after the interval, you're in the 20th century, looking at George's legacy, basically. Stephen Sondheim often uses intervals in a clever and interesting way, as we'll talk about more later on, and this is one of his musicals that is kind of experimental with form, as you have a sort of dual narrative, if you will. I love Sunday in the Park with George for a lot of reasons. I think it's a really interesting look at, like, French 19th century society. I think it's a really interesting look at the sort of tension between art and life. And I love the way it looks at sort of art and the legacy of art, and kind of what you leave behind you. Also, I would say that I'm not someone who is hugely into visual arts. Like, I'm definitely much more of a word person. I think partly because I don't have much of a visual imagination. But I love Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. It's the only bit of art that I understand and that I love. And you know why? Because of Stephen Sondheim, basically. So what I'm basically saying is that as a teenager, Stephen Sondheim got me into history and the only bit of physical art that I'm actually excited by. So, you know, he's been a big influence on my interest in life. But anyway, at number 6, I have Les Miserables by Claude-Michel and Herbert Kretzmer. This is a wonderful musical, very, very famous musical adaptation of Les Miserables, the novel by Victor Hugo. I love it. I think the music is fantastic. I think the story is amazing. I think it's actually a really decent adaptation of Les Miserables. I haven't read Les Miserables, the novel, for a long time. I haven't read it since I was a teenager. Read it because I love the musical. But I was surprised at how accurate and, like, faithful an adaptation of the novel the musical is, considering the musical is musical length and the novel is like 1,000 pages. But Victor Hugo does love a tangent, so there we go. I think Les Miserables, the musical, is actually a pretty good adaptation of Les Miserables, the book. Anyway, I also just think it's an incredible musical with some of my favourite songs from musicals ever. On My Own, Eponine song, the best. Stars, What a Song, One More Day, another history musical in its way, looking really interestingly at 19th century French history, with amazing characterization and some deeply powerful moments. Didn't mention Do You Hear the People Sing or Empty Chairs and Empty Tables. There's so many good songs in Les Miserables, we could be here all day. Okay, at number 5, I have another history musical, Hamilton by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is, as I said, exceptionally talented. And I love Hamilton a lot. Hamilton is obviously a pretty famous musical, looking at the life of Alexander Hamilton, a key figure in the sort of founding of the US. And I think Hamilton is an incredible musical with some amazing songs and a really, like, fantastic use of music and storytelling to explore a really interesting point in history, and also to explore some really interesting characters and some really interesting ideas. I've seen it on stage once. I would love to see it again. I think the music is incredible, and I think the characterization is just, like, top notch. Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, Eliza, like, so many more. It's huge fun, as well as being historically fascinating and really moving, and I just really, really recommend it. At number 4, we've got another Stephen Sondheim. We're going to have a little bit of a Stephen Sondheim run here. At number 4, we have Company by Stephen Sondheim and George Furth, which is a really wonderful, slightly unusually structured musical. It's a musical told in vignettes. As I said, Stephen Sondheim's musicals often do interesting things with narrative structure and storytelling, which is one of the things I love about his musicals so much. I think it's really fun, and I think if you're someone who likes books and likes books that play with form, you'll probably really enjoy Stephen Sondheim's musicals. So Company is the story of Bobby, who is approaching his 30th birthday, and most of his friends are married and in couples. He's the only one who is single, and he gets a lot of pressure from the people around him to settle down and get married and find a relationship. And Company is kind of the story of him starting to realise that maybe he would like to be in a relationship, told through vignettes involving various of his friends. And it's so beautiful and so fun and just so thoroughly enjoyable. And actually, having said that Sunday is the most beautiful thing that Sondheim ever wrote, being alive is pretty up there too. Okay, another Stephen Sondheim. At number 3, we have Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine, which is wonderful. This is a wonderful musical, which is a play on fairy tales and brings together a lot of different characters from different fairy tales and a lot of different fairy tale stories into a new story where all of these characters kind of cross over with each other. And the first half of the story before the interval is the sort of conventional fairy tale, everyone gets the happy ending, and then after the interval you come back and other stuff happens, and it's great. It really like flips a lot of fairy tales and plays on them in a really fun way, and really like picks apart like what makes a happy ending in just wonderful ways, and looks at how, you know, life is not as simple as fairy tales. I have seen Into the Woods several times and I just absolutely adore it. There are some truly fantastic songs in it, some really interesting themes, some really interesting characterization, some wonderful hilarious moments, as well as some really moving moments, and I just love it. There was a film a few years ago. The film was not good. If you have seen the film, ignore the film. Go and watch the musical if you ever get the chance. I feel like Into the Woods is not a musical that works on screen, partly because the interval is so pivotal to the structure of it, because like I said, you have a happily ever after before the interval, and you know there is more to come because it's the interval and you know it's a full-length show. But in the film, especially because they like made quite a lot of cuts to the second half, but not very many to the first half, it just felt like it had a really long ending, or like a weird ending that wasn't an ending and then carried on. Like, it didn't work at all. And they cut some really good songs. Anyway, the film had a great cast and didn't work, and I was sad about it, but if you ever get the chance to see the show, or just go and listen to the music, it's so good. Okay, at number 2, another Sondheim, we have Merrily We Roll Along by Stephen Sondheim and George Firth. I love this musical so much, and it is another of those Stephen Sondheim musicals that plays with form in a really interesting way. So Merrily We Roll Along is a show that works backwards. So you start with 3 characters, 3 friends, in their 40s, I guess. And, well, they're not friends anymore. They used to be friends, but they've fallen out. They all kind of work in the arts. One's a writer, 2 work in kind of theatre and musicals. And over time, they've grown apart, and there's a lot of division between them. And then you work slowly backwards in time, and you see how their friendship collapsed, how they met, and then you go back to, you know, when they're in their 20s and full of hope, and it's so clever and it's so powerful and I love it. And it also has some truly amazing songs in it. I would say that Merrily Roll Along is like one of the least lyrical, melodious of Sondheim's musicals, which is kind of the point, but it has some really like clever storytelling. I feel like the song Opening Doors is like the best piece of art ever about being in your 20s and not really knowing what you're doing with your life and trying very hard to like do something artistic but not being able to. Throughout my 20s, when I was like trying to get a novel published and struggling, whenever I got like a rejection or was feeling down about it, I would just go and like listen to the song Opening Doors, and then I'd feel better about everything. So anyway, I feel like if you like the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, you will like Merrily Roll Along. That's what I should have done. I shouldn't have done a top 15 musicals. I should have done if you like this book, you'll like this musical. I'm gonna do that. I'll do that in a few months. Yes. If you like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, you will like Merrily Roll Along. I just think that sort of like friendship, long friendship over time, and like how working together can damage things. All of the same themes, all of the same themes. The first like proper novel I wrote, which hasn't been published, may never be published, but was the book that got me a literary agent the first time around. It wasn't the first thing I ever wrote. I wrote lots of bad fantasy books as a teenager, but like the first book I wrote like when I was 18 that I like still think has some potential, was kind of inspired by Merrily Roll Along. That's how big an influence Merrily Roll Along had on me as a teenager. Okay, finally, my favourite musical ever is Come From Away by Irene Sakhoff and David Hine, which is just the most beautiful, wonderful, hopeful, joyous thing that has ever existed, and it's the best. But also it's quite sad, but also it's so hopeful. So Come From Away is a fantastic musical about what happened in September 2001 in the town of Gander. So Gander is a small town in Newfoundland in Canada, and before planes could fly a very long way, Gander used to be like the refueling point, and therefore they had an airport, an airfield that could take a lot of planes. So when the September the 11th attacks happened, all the planes were diverted and sent to Gander. And so suddenly this small town of Gander had like plane loads full of people coming to the town who needed somewhere to sleep and who needed food. And they had, I think the amount of people who arrived on planes were sort of equivalent to the population of the town. And Come From Away is about the people of Gander and about the people from the plains who have come to this town who are scared and stressed and worried about their friends and family in the US and elsewhere. And it's about how these people come together and about hope and community in the face of adversity and tragedy and cruelty. And it's just so good. The music is amazing. The storytelling is fantastic. The characterization is so good. And a lot of the characters within the musical are based on real people who shared their experiences over that week. And it's just the best. It's just so emotional. I have seen it a lot of times. It's probably my second most seen musical after Wicked. I think I've seen it 6 or 7 times, and it was not on in London for as long as Wicked was, and I would love to see it again. If you ever get the chance to see Come From Away, go and see it. I know it sounds like a weird premise for a musical, but trust me, it is so good. So there we go, those are my favourite musicals. I feel like this has been a much longer video than I intended and I've rambled on for ages, but there we go. As I said, what I definitely should do is if you like this book, you'll like this musical, so maybe I'll do that soon. And maybe I'll also read Wicked. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I've had a lot of fun making it. Do let me know down in the comments if you like musicals. If you have any musical recommendations for me, do please let me know. I hope you have enjoyed this slightly different video. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with an actually bookish video.